some extent I don't. We cancelled the show in Tel Aviv, and we did it in a place called Never Shalom in Hebrew, or Wahat Asalom, I think it's called in Arabic, and it's a agricultural community halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, where they grow chickpeas. And the guy who runs it is a wonderful, wonderful man. The premise is that Christians and Muslims and Jews work in the fields alongside one another. Their children go to school together, and so they have at least there a generation of children who are growing up without the inherited hatred from the former generation.
I'm going to show something about that in a minute, but first let's have a look at a clip from the documentary Walled Horizons, where we see you near that separation barrier. We'll watch this.
I've written about walls, internal and external, during my career as a songwriter. They always engender in me a desire to understand the reason for them. The reason for walls is always fear, whether they're personal walls that we build around ourselves or walls like this that frightened governments build around themselves. They are always expression of a deep-seated insecurity.
Israel calls it a security fence, and I want to get your impression of what it seemed to be to you, and of course how you think it might have, or how you gauge it affected the psyche of the Palestinian people.
Well, you would have to say that if the Israeli government, on behalf of all the Israeli people, decided that in order to protect themselves from attack, they wanted to build a wall around themselves and become that walled city that we spoke about before, or in this case a walled nation, well then they should build a wall along the Green Line. They should build a wall along the, you know, on the armistice line, not the armistice line, but the 67 border. And one would have to, one might put one's hands up and say, how sad is that? But if that's what they want to do, who are we to tell them that they shouldn't? But that's not where they're building the wall. They're building the wall for 900 kilometers all around the West Bank, and they are annexing the territory that they occupied in 1967. And that is what the world community considers illegal, and that is why those of us who are against it are, you know, prepared to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. This is illegal, immoral, oppressive, repressive, whatever you want. So.
Your revival of the music of The Wall became controversial when you used imagery of a B-52 bomber dropping bombs the shape of the Jewish Star of David, the US dollar sign, I think a big corporation logo such as those of Shell and Mercedes. Why choose those particular symbols?
You know, I should give my apologies to the Dutch for the Shell sign, you know, and the Germans for the Mercedes sign. It just... I wanted to pick symbols that represented all kinds of different religions, but also in terms of Mercedes and Shell, the Shell sign, they represent the whole of the kind of oil industry, who by and large ride roughshod over any kind of ecological needs that the rest of humanity might have. And I think it's really important that those of us who care about global warming or the environment or so on and so forth express the fact that we believe that their need to pay homage to the bottom line in their business overshadows a responsibility that they should have to take care of the environment, because it belongs to all of us, not just the people who own the oil companies or the other big corporations that run the world. Mercedes is a different thing. I've got nothing against Mercedes. I actually own a Mercedes. I'm quite prepared to admit that. But it's a kind of symbol of the excess of luxury that those of us who have cash, and that means a lot of people in the Western world and the Northern Hemisphere take for granted, but that may be something that if we're to share out the wealth of this planet in a fairer way in the future, and hopefully, in consequence, create a world where there is less conflict and less people being blown to bits and less parents losing children and so on and so forth. We may have to be prepared to accept the fact that we may have to settle, you know, for something less elegant.
Now, of course, you got controversy for those images, and the Anti-Defamation League commented that you had crossed the line into anti-Semitism. How did you respond to them? them?
Well, if you go to my website, you can see how I responded. I wrote what I thought was rather a kind of eloquent letter refuting what he was called Abrams or something. Because he hadn't actually seen the show. He'd read a piece in Rolling Stone, and he was responding to that. And it was just the fact that the $sign and the Star of David were on the screen at the same time, where he was saying, oh, you're bringing up all the worst possible, you know, stereotypical anti-Semitic views of Jews and money, and, you know, it's Shakespeare all over again. And he didn't say that. but that's sort of what he meant. And in response to that, I said, it never even occurred to me. I have the hammer and sickle, I have the crescent and the star, I have the crucifix, I have the Star of David, I have the $sign, I have show. There's a ton of things dropping out. I'm making the point that we are bombarded by ideas, both religious, ideological and commercial, and that causes us pain. And it causes death and suffering and whatever from all of those things. And I'm very even-handed about it. I think they withdrew, kind of quietly licking whatever wounds they had. Not that I intended to. And in fact, I have to say this. I said in my piece, the juxtaposition of these symbols is entirely irrelevant to me, so I changed them. So in the show, I went, it doesn't make any difference to me. I don't care, you know.
It's interesting because there are those who say it's possible to criticize anything in the world, but you can't criticize Israel. And there's often a backlash. We've seen journalists fired for a comment here and there and so on. And I wonder, as someone who's been a staunch activist in the situation with the Israelis and Palestinians, apart from that ADL situation, what sort of backlash you faced over the years?
Well, I'm about to face a bit more because I've just written an op-ed piece, which at the moment, I think they're called the International something for Middle Eastern Understanding or something. I'm trying to place with either the New York Times, I think, or the Guardian, or somewhere anyway. And it's actually me calling upon my fellow, I banged the mic, calling on my fellow musicians and artists to join the BDS campaign against Israel, because I've finally decided to put my head above the parapet. Enough is enough. They pay lip service to the idea that they want to make peace with the Palestinians, and they sort of talk around the possibility of a two-state solution. But in the meantime, they're throwing people out of their homes in the Negev, in East Jerusalem. They're annexing huge parts of the West Bank. So all this talk about is just they're quietly getting on with taking over the whole of the land, and what happens then to the Palestinians? And I'm really concerned about that, as was my father, interestingly enough. My father taught at St. George's School in Jerusalem from 1936 to 1938, and was very concerned, even then, you know, before the war, before the Holocaust, before all of that, about what was going on in Palestine.
And he died fighting in Italy, I gather. Is that right?
He died at Anzio, fighting the Germans in 1944.
Now, you know, you talked earlier about the concert you did, and we're going to take another look at that documentary, Walled Horizons, where you were playing a concert at Neve Shalom. Let's listen to that.
I may be speaking out of turn.